welcome everybody and good morning and welcome to Exploring Business Ownership for People with Disabilities. This webinar is being presented by the Maine Small Business Development Center at USM in partnership with the Maine Department of Labor's Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. My name is Christina Oddleifson, and I'm a business advisor with the SBDC. I cover primarily Cumberland and parts of York County. And I'm joined by Peter Harriman, who is the Southern Maine Director of the SBDC, as well as Shannon Burns, who is a CRC rehabilitation consultant with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And all of our contact information is on this screen, our emails and phone numbers, if you would like to contact any of us after this webinar. And before we get going, just a few things to know about some details behind the webinar. The first is that the webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on the SBDC's YouTube channel. I don't believe anybody will be shown on camera, but if you want to make sure that doesn't happen, you can certainly turn off your camera. After this presentation, you will be sent an email that will include the slides from the presentation, and it will have all of the links to the resources that we're going to be talking about today. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, you can also contact us to get a copy of the slides, and usually we'll get those out to you within a week. And as we go along, please put any questions you might have in the chat, and we should have some time at the end for a discussion. So I wanted to start out with just by telling you a little bit about the Maine SBDC. We are an organization that's been around for a long time, almost 50 years, and we're the result of a partnership between the federal government, the SBA, and the state of Maine, and we are hosted by the University of Southern Maine. And what we do, as this slide says, we provide no-cost, confidential business advising services for both aspiring and current business owners in the state of Maine. We have about 12 advisors in the state, and we are all people who owned businesses in Maine or have business degrees or both. And the topics on the screen in front of you, which I will read out, are topics that we often talk to people about. They include business planning and startups, business transitions and exits, credit and financing for small businesses, financial analysis, marketing and sales, and operations management. But we talk about a lot of different topics. And if for some reason we don't know the answer to something, we will find you a resource. So I just encourage anybody who might be thinking about starting a business or has a business to feel free to reach out to us to sign up for advising. So our agenda today is, as the screen says, it got 3 parts. And the first part is assessing whether business ownership or self-employment is the right fit for you. And as I said, my name is Christina, and I'm going to be covering that part of the presentation. And before I go on, I just want to make a note that we often talk about both business ownership and self-employment as the same thing, which essentially they are. It's just really a matter of scale. So if you were thinking of starting a business and it's just going to be you and you're self-employed, you're starting a business. So this webinar is definitely for you. The second part is about business planning and why it's such a critical part of this process. And Peter Harriman from the SBDC will be talking about that. And finally, Shannon will finish by talking about resources just for entrepreneurs with disabilities. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about what we know of why people start their own business. So as this slide says, why do people start their own business? And this comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And it's the top 3 reasons that people cite. And the first reason is to fulfill a passion or find a purpose. And that is certainly something that we all want, right? You know, we spend a lot of time working and we want it to be meaningful. So I love that reason. The second reason that people cite is they think it's the best way to build personal wealth. And the answer to that question is it depends. It depends on the industry you're in. It depends how well you run your business. So it's not necessarily a given. It could be that working for someone else might be the best way to build personal wealth, but it could be either one. And the third reason that people cite is that they are starting businesses because they don't want a boss or they don't like their job. And I think that's really probably reflective of people wanting control over their life, wanting control over their work. So those are all, top reasons that people have cited for starting a business. And as this slide says, your why is critical. It needs to sustain you in tough times. And what that means is you really want to do an inventory and ask yourself why you want to start a business. Because in addition to being a lot of fun and very fulfilling, being self-employed or owning a business is hard. It can be lonely, it can be challenging. Certainly a lot of business owners who just went through a global pandemic and then inflation and labor shortages can tell you why. So you just want to be really clear that you've got a reason for doing this that's going to sustain you. So ask yourself, as this slide says, do I have the passion for this work? Is this something I really like to do? The second bullet point is, do I enjoy using the skills required for this work? Because you're going to be using them every day, all day. And the third point to think about is, do I see an unmet need in the marketplace? And Peter's going to be talking more about that and how to figure out if there's a need in the marketplace. But it's really important because some people make assumptions that they like to do something and that there's going to be market demand for that thing. And you just want to be sure that you've done the research to make sure that there's an unmet need, because every successful business is filling a need or solving a problem in the marketplace. And certainly if you see a need, that can be a really good reason to start a business to address that need. This next slide says successful entrepreneurs have these traits, and I've listed 6, and I'm going to walk through those. And these come from a series of different surveys with entrepreneurs. And as I read them, I want you to think about, does this describe you in any way? And the first thing that they all state is that they are passionate about what they do. There's that word passion again. Because again, you need to really believe in what you're doing to keep going when times get a little tough. Successful entrepreneurs are oftentimes people who are willing to listen and learn from other people. If you think that you know it all, but when you start, it closes you down from just thinking about new ways of doing things. So you want to find a mentor. You want to find a colleague to talk to and learn from them. And certainly the SBDC plays that role for many entrepreneurs in Maine, as do organizations like SCORE and the Women's Business Center. This third reason is probably no surprise. Successful entrepreneurs are hardworking, independent, and goal-oriented people. The next one is that they are flexible and inquisitive. And this is also really an important quality, because when systems or things around you change, like a pandemic, you want to be able to reorient yourself, reboot your business, be flexible, and also to always ask customers for feedback and to respond to that feedback. So being inquisitive and flexible is really, really critical. And the last two are that successful entrepreneurs are problem solvers. They don't see a problem as a barrier. They see it as a way to find a solution, and they are very resilient people. So not all of us have these qualities. And so you don't want to feel like you must have all of these qualities, but certainly want to ask yourself if none of these are really resonating with you, which is absolutely fine, because we're all different people. We all have different skills. But if none of these really resonate, then you want to ask yourself, is self-employment or business ownership the right step for you? This next slide says, do you have industry experience? ask yourself, what jobs have I had in this industry? What relevant skills do I have? And how will I fill in the gaps? There are times when people come to us at the SBDC and want to start businesses in industries where they have not worked. And there's no rule that you have to, but it certainly sets you up for success if you really understand the industry you're getting into. So I often, if somebody comes to me with that, I will say, that's great. Let's make this a goal, with the first step of that goal to go out and get some industry experience, because sometimes we romanticize what it might be like to work in that industry, and you really want to, try it out before you start your own. And if similarly, you may just have a set of skills that are relevant to that industry, and that can be, equally important. But if neither of those things are true, then you do want to think through, how are you going to fill in the gaps before you start? And on the other side of that coin is, what business skills do you have? And it's important to remember that when you start a business, you're going to be doing the thing that you started that business for, that service or that product, but you're also going to have a whole nother job, which is running a business. And the types of topics that people usually have to handle are financial management, marketing, customer relations, knowing technology and software, and people management if you might, end up hiring employees. And I will also tell you that many of the people that come to the SBDC don't have these skills, but you still do need to figure out how you're going to backfill, how you're going to bring these things to your business, because a successful business needs to have these things in place. And the first step for a lot of people is learning them themselves. You can find basic ways to track your financials of your business. A lot of people figure out how to set up their own websites and do their own social media marketing. But if that's not something that you want to be doing, then you want to think through, how will you get those things into your business? Sometimes people subcontract that kind of work out. But it's just important to remember, you're doing both sides when you're a business owner. And this next slide says, what will be the financial impact? And it's important, before you leave a job or give up benefits, that you understand what you're likely to get in profit from the business activity that you're considering. So the first place to start is to really do an assessment and understand your own personal finances, which is the first bullet point on this screen. And we can help you do that if you've never done that before, but you need to understand what income needs to come into your household in order to meet your expenses. And if you are disabled and you have specific benefits that you're receiving, you want to make sure you understand how extra income might impact those benefits. And Shannon's going to be talking a little bit about ways and resources to help you do that. And finally, you also, before you start a business, really want to prepare a financial projection before you make the leap. And Peter will talk about that a little bit in the planning section, but I put it here because it's such a crucial piece. I have had clients go through the process of projecting, and what that means is basically you're budgeting out month by month for the first year the potential revenue you might bring in and the costs of running your business by month. And sometimes people look at that and it's really an aha moment where they realize maybe they had made some assumptions about what they're going to be making. And maybe they decide to start it as a side gig rather than, leave a job to see how it goes. So those are really critical things to be asking yourself when it comes to finances. And finally, for my section, this slide says, what's your support system? As I said, owning a business, being self-employed can be a lot of fun and very fulfilling, but you do need a support system around you, because sometimes it does get a little tough. And you want to think through, where will you get business advice? Again, that can be a colleague, it can be an SBDC counselor, SCORE, Women's Business Center. But it's important just to get that space where you have somewhere to go to talk about your business. And the second point is who or what is going to provide you with emotional support. Again, very, very important to get some space between you and the business so that you can get that, bird's eye perspective and think strategically about your business. And you need to be able to step away from your business in order to do that and really kind of refresh yourself and bring new enthusiasm to what you're doing. And the third bullet point and the final point is what's in place in case you're unable to work? Will you have someone like another colleague who can take on your clients, a subcontractor, or is there an employee that you can delegate to? But it is important to think through something like this because inevitably life, brings situations where you may need to step away for a little while. So that is the end of my section, and Peter Harriman is now going to take over and talk about what business planning is and why it's so important.
Thank you, Tina. So as Tina illustrated, first, we should understand the mindset we need to be in to be a business owner. And once we decide, yes, we have the right mindset and supports and skills, then we can decide, let's plan this out before we start. So my slide is entitled, What is Business Planning? And business planning is really a systematic way of investigating if your business idea will work. So it's taking a very large problem that sometimes seems too large, and it breaks this problem down into very small steps that we can accomplish or tackle one at a time. And so we take a big problem and we just focus on the smaller steps to try to get our answers. Now, business planning can take many forms. And on the slide, we have a few forms listed. It can be a full written plan, and that's what I help many clients with. In fact, the Small Business Development Center has a business plan guide that is online that we make available. It could be a one-page lean plan, which is a more visual plan that you can lay out. It could be something called a pitch deck, which is, if you think about it, it's like an elevator pitch. If you had 4 minutes to convince someone of your idea, could you do that? It could even be a map, or it could be checklists. There are many different ways and forms that the business planning can take. The important step is that we are looking at the business in a systematic way to make sure that we're touching on all the important points that we need to. Next slide. So the title of this slide is, Why is it important? And I begin this slide with a quote that I have heard recently is attributed to Taylor Swift. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Now, I always attributed this to Benjamin Franklin, but I can see where Taylor Swift incorporated it into a song, so it is relevant. But the point of the quote is that you need to plan. Your plan is going to be your best guess. As a business owner, you don't know how it exactly will come out, but you need to prepare yourself for these scenarios, the different ways that it can come. Because business planning ultimately is going to try to help you avoid some common pitfalls. And on the slide, we have 3 common pitfalls that we see. The first common pitfall is that we make assumptions about the demand of our product or service. What that means is when we get excited about starting a business, we tend to think positively, this is going to work, everyone is going to want this. And what we need to do with business planning is step back and ask ourselves, why do we think this is going to work? Why do we think everyone's going to need this? So part of business planning is to challenge our assumptions of why we think this will work. because we need to not only look at the positive, but we need to look at any potential negative. So anything that might be telling us this won't work or this isn't a good idea. So we have to keep ourselves open to both the positive and negative to make sure that we're going into this with our eyes wide open. Another common pitfall that we see is cash flow problems. When people start businesses, sometimes they don't realize there are actually two startup costs, right? There's the cost just to open the doors, and that's where most businesses focus. And then there's a cost to keep the business running, right? So part of business planning is not only understanding the cost to open the door and how they're going to get that money, but it's also looking at your expenses to figure out, will you have the money to keep operating? Because most businesses will fail because they run out of cash, not because they couldn't get the cash to open. So part of business planning, as we'll get to, is looking at your revenues and expenses and trying to figure out how will this go throughout the year so we don't run into cash flow problems. The third step that's listed here is marketing missteps. And oftentimes that is not understanding your client, and so not marketing appropriately. And we see a lot of clients with marketing who spend a lot of money and their message doesn't get out. So business planning is going to help you identify who your ideal clients are and what they want. The business plan, first and foremost, is to help convince you that this is an idea worth doing. But it is also something that is required by banks and investors to help convince them that this idea will work as well. Next slide. So the next few slides, we're going to go through what's included in business planning, and we're going to go through that by going through a series of questions. So the top of the slide says, what does it include? And the first question is, why? Why do you think that your product or service is going to be something that is needed in the marketplace? Are you solving a problem? Are you bringing some kind of special, I call it special sauce, but are you bringing something unique to the marketplace to help businesses or help people solve their problem? Or are you making their lives easier? What is your mission statement? What do you want your business to stand for? So why? Why are you doing this? What are you selling and how much will you charge? And this is one of the hardest things a business will have to do in the beginning, is trying to determine what they're selling and how they're going to sell it, right? And how they're going to sell it is what price they're going to set for their product or service, because no one's going to tell you what to price your product or service for. So you're going to want to go through some exercises to understand this is the price I should charge. And pricing is very hard because you have to look at your costs, you have to look at your competitors, and you have to look at if your brand has any value. And that's something that might build over time. So the what of what you are selling and how much you will charge is very important. The next question that we tackle is who? Who is your target customer? And this one I love because not everyone is going to want your product or service, and that is okay, right? So your target customer is a very specific person, and I often tell my clients, think of someone in mind. Actually picture someone who would be most likely to buy your service or your product, right? That is your target customer. And you need to understand who they are and how you can get in marketing to them and how much they might want to pay for your product or service. You also need to know who your competitors are, because that's just as important. Because when you go out into the marketplace, when you're going out into the world, there's a whole bunch of options that people are going to have. So you need to know who is it that you're competing against and what are they offering and how. It goes back to the why. How am I different? Next slide. This next slide continues the questions, right? So where are you going to sell this? Are you going to sell this in a store, in a traditional brick and mortar store? Are you going to sell this online? Are you going to sell this directly to a customer? Are you going to wholesale this? So what sales channels are you going to use to sell your product? Because that could make a difference in how much you charge and how you reach your client and how you market. The next thing we're going to look at is how. How do you operate your business? What hours will you be open? What systems do you need to have in place as far as a system to accept payments, credit cards and such? Do you need a system to allow people to book for your services? Do you need a website that offers a shopping cart so they can buy them online? How is it that people are going to be able to buy your services or products? And lastly, when? When do you plan to do this? What is your timeline of launching this business? Is there a better time throughout the year to launch your business? And where do we want to take this business? Is this business just going to be you and you're comfortable with that? Or is this a business you plan to grow and maybe you'll have multiple locations? That's something we want to think about now so we can put steps in place to grow as we grow the business. Next slide. So ultimately, when we look at the numbers of the business plan, because so far we have been answering questions about the business plan, but we're also going to look at the numbers. What do your numbers mean? What do they need to include? As I said, there's two costs. So the first numbers that you're going to include is your startup cost, the cost that you would need to incorporate or have explained as far as this is what I need just to open the doors of the business, just to start the business. Next, we're going to look at your revenues, right? And we're going to focus on the revenues first because we need to think, how will money come into the business? How many clients are going to buy my service? Remember, we already tried to figure out, how are we going to sell our services? Is it going to be subscription? Is it going to be or products? Is it going to be a package? How many in a package? So we have to estimate, how many are we going to sell? How popular is the service going to be? And I always advise people, think of this throughout the year, because oftentimes in Maine, there could be a cycle to how things are sold because Maine is very touristy or it's got a lot of seasons. So maybe your product or service is more popular during a certain time of the year. So you would want to break out your projections by month over the course of a year. So look at your revenue first and how do we think that's going to come in? Because the second thing you're going to do is you're going to look at your budget for expenses. And you're going to want to understand what expenses are typical, right? Heat, electricity, marketing, website, there's expenses, and that's where we can help as well. The SBDC, we can kind of prompt you on what some expenses are common in starting a business. Now, I said revenue first because as your expenses are listed, we don't want that revenue changing just to match the expenses, right? So we wanted to look at the revenue first and have that set. Then we look at the expenses and try to figure that out. Because at the end, we're going to look at how much profit we think the business is going to make. And that profit is important because we need to know, ideally before we start the business, if it's going to make enough money for us to want to invest the time and effort into it. There's a lot of businesses I know that aren't making much money. Well, you need to step back. Part of Tina's presentation was stepping back and understanding, why do I want to do this? And part of the business planning is, I want to do this. How do I do this? Why do I do this? But how much money would I need to make this something I go forward with? And that's what the business plan is ultimately trying to figure out is, will this be successful and how successful? And is that enough to make me want to put the effort in? So throughout our work, we often are working with other partners. And one partner who is on today, Shannon Burns, is going to talk to you about the Bureau of Rehabilitation. I can't even say it. Bureau of Rehabilitation Services. So Shannon, please take it away.
Thanks, Peter. So yes, I'm Shannon Burns. I'm a rehabilitation consultant with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. And we work regularly with the SBDC with our clients to develop self-employment plans. So the Bureau of, I just noticed we forgot the U in Bureau. The Bureau of Rehab Services consists of the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, which includes the Division of Deafness, Hard of Hearing, and Late Deafened. The Systems Improvement and Quality Assurance, which keeps us on task and making sure we're doing the things that we need to do, as well as the Division for the Blind and Visually Impaired, which has its own vocational rehabilitation program. Next slide. So what is VR? So we are a state of Maine agency that assists individuals with disabilities to prepare for, find, keep, and advance in integrative competitive employment. And we provide services to people basically ages 14 and up who have a disability and are interested in employment. Next slide. To be eligible for voc rehab, folks need to have a physical or mental impairment or a significant visual impairment, which results in a substantial impediment to employment, and require voc rehab services to obtain, secure, regain employment. Next slide. And you can apply for our services through our website, both the DVR website and the DBVI website, and submit an application online, or you can contact a local office and request an application. Next slide. So if you are an individual with a disability who is interested in self-employment and you would like to work with voc rehab and have submitted an application, we would go through an eligibility process. If you were found eligible, we would work with you on what's called the individualized plan for employment. You would work with a voc rehab counselor to identify an employment goal based on your interests, skills, and abilities, the labor market, barriers and needed accommodations. So what is getting in the way for you for employment? And a VR counselor would be continually working with you on what are your rehabilitation needs and what do you need to be successful in the workplace. So one of the things, you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we would work on with you is exploring your interests and abilities. What do you want to do for your employment goal? And is that employment goal something that's self-employment? And if you work with your VR counselor and the two of you are working together and it looks like, based on the exploration that you and the voc rehab counselor have done, that seems like self-employment might be a viable option, and you have a business idea that your VR counselor thinks might be feasible, that's when we would make a referral to SBDC to work with the voc rehab counselor and you as the client to really figure out how viable is this business idea, and to help with writing a business plan. Because VR counselors are really great with career exploration, really great at finding your strengths and abilities and figuring out your needed accommodations, but we are not business experts. And so that's why we rely on the SBDC. Next slide. Oh, actually, wait, can you go back one? Sorry. So when we work with someone, we services can only be funded if they're authorized in advance by a VR counselor. We always look at the comparable benefits. Is there other money available that could pay for a service? Sometimes clients are asked to share in costs if it's needed. And services must be provided as cost effectively as possible. So one of the things to know when working with VR and the SBDC, if you have a self-employment goal with us, is that we can provide some support with the business if there's a conversation and it seems feasible, and it's done ahead of time before those costs need to be paid. So I just want to put that out there. Next slide. So if you want more information about vocational rehabilitation, this was just my quick little 5-minute explanation of who we are and what we do. You can look at our consumer handbook, which is available online. And we also run a monthly orientation for folks that is open to the public on Zoom the third Thursday of every month. And you can just click on the link and come in and learn more about our programs. Next slide. So for me, this is probably one of the more important slides here is what are the resources available for folks with with disabilities who are interested in entrepreneurship and self-employment. So what this list goes through is some, not all, of the resources that might be available to someone. The VR self-employment guide is done through the University of Montana and their rural community inclusion program. And it provides a lot of steps and things to look at when considering self-employment as a goal and lays out some really nice templates and things to think about. A really important service for folks is the Maine Medical Center's benefit counseling services. So if you are someone who is receiving Social Security benefits, SSI or SSDI, and you are interested in work, whether that is working for an employer or working for yourself through self-employment, this is a really important service because they will help you figure out how much you can work, what you can do, and how your benefits might be impacted so that you can make an informed decision. And you don't have to be part of Voc Rehab to receive this service. If you are an SSI or SSDI recipient, you can ask for these services. There's also the National Disability Institute Small Business Hub. There's a lot of resources there that someone can look at and go through and review about self-employment. There's also services for employment through the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Aging and Disability Services. One of the ones I wanted to mention here today for self-employment is a newer program with ODES and New Ventures Maine that is called Self-Employment for Me. It is directed towards folks who have developmental or intellectual disabilities, and they offer a class for folks to sort of figure out if self-employment is right for them. The next class coming up is in January, starts in January, lasts for 10 weeks. It's newer. I'm still learning about it myself. So if you have questions, I may not be able to answer them, but I do have contact information for somebody at ODES who did say I can share her information if you have questions about that program. And then there's also the Job Accommodations Network, which is also called JAN. The website is called Ask JAN. And you can look up accommodations for many, many, many disabilities. And it's a really great resource for anybody. We use it a lot in voc rehab. And I think I just saw something pop up in the chat there. And I think that was what I had. Is there an additional slide?
We just have 2 slides with the contact information for the Division of Voc Rehab, as well as information on how to connect with the SBDC. As I said, you will be getting a copy of these slides sometime within the next week. And if you are seeing this on YouTube, you can also ask for these slides, which will have the links to all the resources, especially that Shannon outlined, as well as contact information for each of the presenters and for our organizations. And you're very welcome to contact us with any kinds of questions related to self-employment or starting a business if you are disabled. Thank you so much, everybody, and hope you have a good rest of your day.